Hello everyone, my name is Thomas Warso. I'm the CEO of Qlife. Qlife is a company on a mission to bring blood biomarker testing into more decentralized locations, including into your own home, so that you can sit at home and measure blood biomarkers that may be relevant for a disease or a condition that you may have. And you may then be able to send off the data to your doctor, to the hospital, or just keep it for yourself. So our aim in life is to make clinical grade biomarker data easily and quickly accessible. There it is. So healthcare systems all over the world are under pressure. We all live longer lives. That's a good thing, but it also means that there's a lot more diseases to be treated. And treatment means more diagnosis. Diagnosis means more blood biomarker testing. And we at Qlife is proposing to bring this blood biomarker testing more decentralized, because to do all this blood biomarker testing, which is really routine, but nevertheless something that requires a lot of resources, we propose to bring it out more decentral, so that you can either do it in a local, at the local GP office or somewhere else, or eventually in the home. Because as I usually say, you know, what is more scalable than actually having people to do it at home? We also see this megatrend of chronic diseases, where people that have a chronic disease, they want to have more control over their disease in order to ease their pain. My own wife has some level of arthritis in her back, and she's definitely experimenting with taking supplements. She's very well concerned about what she's eating, physiotherapy, and all kinds of stuff. I'm in the fortunate position that I can help her a little bit with measure some clinical grade biomarker data at home. And she can correlate her activities with the data that we can create from this little device here. And that gives her a feeling of self-empowerment. And that actually helps her a lot to understand all the activities she's doing. How does that correlate with the truth, so to speak? What are the data from her body? And what we are proposing is that when she next time sees her doctor, she can come up to the doctor and she can have a discussion with the doctor on a basis of knowledge. What is actually going on? And then we see the a growing market or growing trend in what we call lifestyle diseases. We all know it. Diseases that we should avoid. We should live healthy alive, you know, avoid getting diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and, you know, all these bad things. And what we think is that people actually would very much like to avoid these diseases, of course, but there are no tools where you can measure whether you are in the pre-diabetes stage or if you are actually approaching a type 2 diabetes. So at Qlife, we are proposing to make this tool available so that you can start to actually have the data and that you can react in due time before you enter into a state where it becomes too late. Sorry, wrong way. This is our system. It looks big on the screen here, but it's actually not so big. It's quite small. It's only 11 centimeters in height. We worked a little bit with the design, so we think it's something that people would like to have standing at their night table or in the bathroom at home or whatever. It's actually a very complex technical system, and it's a cloud-based system. Being cloud-based means that we can access the devices from everywhere. So, you know, and that's pretty important to our business model, because we expect to have thousands, maybe 10,000 of devices out there in people's home. We need to upgrade firmware or other types of software, and therefore it's important that we don't have to physically get to the devices, a little bit like when you're updating your Windows applications. Being a cloud-based system also means that the people that are using the system, they are accumulating a lot of data. And in the future, we are planning to apply certain algorithms, such as machine learning, artificial intelligence, and you can correlate those algorithms with other types of lifestyle metrics, and then you can start to do prognosis and risk stratifications for people. In other words, you can tell them what are the risks for getting a certain disease in the future based on the data you have today. So to summarize how it works so that you, from a finger stick in your finger, get a drop of blood, or from a mouth swab, or from a lower nasal swab. We all know how that works today with COVID. You use that as a specimen. The specimen goes into the capsule. We can measure DNA, RNA, or protein. I usually say around 80% of all biomarkers we can measure. Once the specimen is in the capsule goes into the device, and the device starts to generate raw data. The raw data from the cloud is sent down to the smartphone, and you have the result. It takes between 2 to 30 minutes, depending on what type of test it is. So whether you are an old man that have diabetes, whether you are a young kid that is born with a genetic disease, maybe you are a sports fanatic that wants to measure all types of metrics related to your performance, or maybe you are a young person that is a little bit feeling stressed out from all the pressure in school or university. We all need to measure biomarkers that can tell us something about the health status. That could be very relevant for all of us. So for the rest of this presentation, we have chosen to structure it so that I'm trying to answer questions, because we know that our shareholders have been asking a little bit about specific questions related to operations. So I will be trying to do that here. So what has Qlife been focused on for the past 12 months? Well, like anyone else, we jumped on the COVID bandwagon, and we have been capable of generating around 35 million Swedish krona in sales during the past 12 months. But more importantly, I think we have used that to really transform the company from being an R&D-based company to be a more operational-based company, so that we now have sales departments, marketing, regulatory, production, etc., etc. And then we have been very much focused on creating what's called a technical dossier for our fundamental platform, the EcoHealth, this little device here. And that has been a little bit, it actually has been a lot of work, because when we went IPO around 18 months ago, we were under the In Vitro Diagnostic Directive, but that has since changed to become the In Vitro Diagnostic Regulation. And the requirement here in Europe is now a lot harder, a little bit like the FDA in the United States. So there are a lot harder or a lot bigger documentation burden, and we have been working on fulfilling that. That has to do with software documentation. The system we have created is very heavy on software, and there's a lot of documentation that needs to be done. And in production, there's a lot of production validation documentation. So all of that we have been focused on for the past 12 months, really to build the company. So for the next 12 months, we are focused on creating what's called CE protocols for the next biomarkers that we intend to bring to market. Those two biomarkers are CRP, C-reactive protein, which is sort of an all-round biomarker which tells you about your inflammation status. It also correlates to disease progression. So it's something that's used a lot in relation to chronic diseases. And it's also the biomarker that when you go up to your GP, if they are suspecting that you have an infection, they will use CRP to see if it's a virus infection or a bacteria infection. So it's a very all-round biomarker, and we are proposing to bring that into the homes of people so that you can sit at home and measure this C-reactive protein. And then we are focused on a biomarker called PKU, which is a genetic biomarker. It's 1 out of 10,000 child is born with this genetic deficiency, which means that you cannot digest protein. It's a severe disease that you will eventually get brain damage if you eat too much protein. So these children need to measure their blood every day. And it's a big hassle for them to go to the hospital. So we are proposing they can sit at home and do it. In order to produce these biomarkers and make the technical files, we need to produce around 12,000 capsules under the new IVDR. We used to be able to do it with 1,200 capsules. So it's about 10 times up in terms of how many analytical data we have to do to achieve a CE mark today. Once we have done that, we will submit to the notified body, the authorities, and then they have about up to 6 months to give us the approval. And then over the next 12 months, of course, we will be focused on launching these products, and we will also be focused on developing business cases for the next biomarkers that we will be launching. In terms of CRP, we expect to achieve a CE mark in March of 23. This means that we will submit it to the authorities in October of next year. And for PKU, we expect to have it in May 23, which means that we will submit it to the authorities in December of next year. One point I do want to make here today is that what is really important for Qlife is that although we are a little bit delayed in relation to all these activities I just mentioned, primarily due to the shift from IVDD to IVDR, what is really important for us is that we have created the fundamental platform. And that means in the future, when we bring new biomarkers to the market, we don't have to redo everything. We have created the fundamental technical file. Of course, then we have to do the analytical data, and we have to do clinical trials. But once that is done, we can bring products to market. So we are expecting that that we can do 1 to 2 biomarkers per 18 months, so approximately between 5 to 10 biomarkers over the next 5 years. In terms of, we do have a COVID product on the market, a PCR test. And I don't know if you know, but we were the company in Denmark that did all the COVID PCR testing for the professional football, for the professional handball, badminton, ice hockey. We also had some ice hockey clubs here in Denmark, and we did a lot of testing. The idea was to bring this product into the home use as well, but at this time we have decided to wait a little bit with that, to put it on hold, because we have to prioritize our resources. We are a little bit uncertain whether a PCR home use test would be something that people would be willing to invest in at this time due to all the antigen self-testing which is now available. So we are prioritizing our resources on the 2 other biomarkers that I just mentioned. It is possible at some time that we will be able to gain additional finance to continue that development. That is uncertain at this time. In terms of our production volumes, there have been some questions to that. I have brought the numbers with me here. In terms of the devices, we were targeting originally to produce from 150 in Q1 of last year to around 600 in this Q4. And we haven't been able to get up to those numbers. We produced 80 in Q1 and 250 we expect to produce in this Q4. In terms of the capsules, we are pretty much on target. We were planning to produce 10,000 in Q1, going up to 40,000 in Q4. And we should be at around 40,000 in this quarter here. This production output has been used of course, to our sales, but also to support internal studies to get SARS, our PCR test, approved with the authorities. We are planning production-wise over the next 3 years to scale, as it is written here. In January of next year, we expect to be able to output around 20,000 capsules per month. And then we are planning to replicate our production lines and go into 2 shifts so that we can pretty much double that. In parallel with that, we are adding some semi-automation functionalities to these production lines. And that means that we around Q3 of next year should be at around 150,000 capsules per month. And in parallel with that, we are in process of planning a full automation plant so that we can really increase our production output. In terms of our device, as I showed you before, we haven't really gotten up in terms of volumes with production volumes. So what we have done instead is that we have outsourced the device to a partner, and this partner is in process of taking over the production of the device. This device here is structured so that it is assembled in different modules. At this time here, our partner is producing 2 of the modules, and towards the end of next year, they should be producing all 6. And then they should eventually end up building what we call box builds, so that we never see the product, but they ship directly to our customers. There has also been some questions related to our sales partner, Finnish Aidian, one of the leaders in the point-of-care diagnostic business. And the status is that we did get up a little bit to a slow start with Adyen around March, April last year. There was a lot of sort of formalities that needed to be taken care of. Our manuals needed to be translated into 12 different local languages in order to launch in these countries where it's a requirement that the manual has to be in the local language. We also had to work with some data integration to public systems, et cetera. So when we launched with Adyen, we were basically hitting around mid of last year. And what we saw was that Adyen was going to the clinical markets where the demand for COVID testing at that time was a bit saturated with instrumentation, which is more clinical than our system is. So since then, Adyen has changed their strategy to be much more decentralized, and we are seeing today that sales are picking up. And overall, we are we are quite happy with the progress that we are seeing. I can say that our sales today, if you look at which countries that we are selling in, we are actually selling 80% of our sales to Sweden. So we are predominantly selling in this country. 20% is the rest is going to Germany and a few other countries. So how do Qlife see the sort of market foundation for our business model in the future? Well, we think that the decentralization of taking blood is something that will only grow over the next or over the coming many years. We think that healthcare systems need to move all these routine tasks away from the GP offices, away from the institutions, away from the hospitals, and then do it much more decentralized, because it's really routine, and if the doctors and nurses do not have to do that, they can focus on something which is much more important, like treating diseases. However, the IVDR, the in vitro diagnostics regulation, has made that business model much more difficult. However, you can also turn it around and say that having gone through all these sort of initial exercises, getting our technical dossier and everything done, means that Qlife is in a really good position to capitalize on this business model. I've shown this slide before. It really is supposed to illustrate our upscaling journey. We believe that the two first boxes here, we have achieved those in our journey. We have gone to market with an interesting product. We work closely with a lot of key opinion leaders. We have built revenues, built production, and we have built sales. And for the future, we are going to focus in a specific genetic fields where there is a very well-defined business case and a very big need for this PKU biomarker. We are going to get a lot of experience with these users and sending data into public systems so the clinicians can actually see the data and use this on a daily basis. And from there on, we are going to continue to build biomarkers and build the business in different directions. In terms of our IP, Qlife has filed 2 fundamental IPs in Denmark. One of them has been issued, the other one is close to being issued, and both of them are in PCT proceedings, which means that we will eventually get protection worldwide. And of course, during this PCT, initially you go to the big countries, and then you work from there. We are not involved in COVID laboratory testing anymore. Just to make that point, we used to be very much involved when we had all these professional sports, but we stopped that at some point, and now we are in a transition phase to only sell our fundamental product, the EcoHealth platform. And I wanted to make that point because if you look at our revenues over the last 4 quarters, we had around 10 to 11 million revenues in Q1. That was all from laboratory testing. In Q2, we had about the same, and that was also all from laboratory testing. In Q3, we saw a dip in our revenue, around 6 million Swedish kronor, but that was all from sales of the EcoHealth platform. So that transition has been really important for us, and I actually think that we have been quite successful in transforming those revenues from the laboratory to this little system here. And although I cannot provide any guidance for Q4, I can say that we are optimistic about the future. So just to summarize Qlife, The shift from IVDD to IVDR has been a big one, but I think we have been very successful in doing it and focusing our resources on having that done. The foundation for the future is established. The transition from laboratory sales to eco-health sales is done. And we think the company is well positioned to be a first mover in the clinical grade biomarker home use testing. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Thomas, for a good presentation. I have a few follow-up questions to you, and listening in, I kind of realized that there will be probably a few doctors without work when you launch your platform. Is there generally support or opposition from the doctors out there towards home testing?
Well, I would say that one of the barriers we do see is that GPs, general practitioners, overall are a little skeptical in terms of having patients sitting at home and measure biomarkers that are clinical grade level, and then come up to the doctor and basically already know what their diagnosis is. So GPs are a little skeptical on that, but we also seen that there's a new generations of GPs coming to the market, and they are much more tech savvy and much more interested in actually using these types of tools, and they can see the advantage in having patients coming in on a basis of knowledge, and then maybe have a more progressive discussion with the patient.
Is there a risk that a layman like myself, if I were to take an ego test, would I be able to see the big picture? Would that only be a number that I would need to interpret myself, or would the ego platform help me draw the right conclusions from that?
So one thing I think is important to stress is that we are never providing diagnosis. We are only providing monitoring, but we are doing it on a clinical level. So you should never, when you measure our biomarkers, you should never sort of say, well, this is the way it is. A biomarker data is just part of a long sort of range of different factors that makes up your diagnosis. But it is something that can give you very important information about which direction you are going. And then I think it's one point I think is really important is that when we get data about our health today, we typically just get one data. But what really is important is to get many data so that you over a period of time can see whether you are going up or you are going down. Nobody does that today, but it's really that which indicates whether you are going in direction of a diabetes or if you're doing well. And basically you don't know.
I do buy into the argumentation that you make that this is only going to grow. And of course, being a first mover like you look to be, the transition from IVDD to IVDR, that provides some kind of barriers of entry towards your competition.
Yeah.
Would you say that a small company like Qlife, is that an advantage for you to have that position, or is that something that can quite easily be overtaken by some of the larger players out there?
That's a good question. I definitely think it's a big advantage for us when we look at the big companies like Roche and Becton Dickinson and all of these types of companies. They are not really moving into the home use or self-testing home use because they basically think it's too difficult. So I think they are waiting to see if someone like us can break through into that market. And I think the danger for them will be that once they realize that this is the way the world is going, it will be too late, and we will hopefully be too big then. But we will have to see.
Great. I have a few last questions before we round off for lunch. But I assume that there is very few limitations to the number of tests that you could develop. What is the approximation of a cost to develop one new test? From development to a clinically or commercially validated product?
Yeah, that's also a good question. I would say it used to be in Swedish krona, maybe between 3 to 5 million. Now it's a lot more. It's closer to be between 10 to 15 million to go through all these documentation processes. It really has become a lot more difficult and therefore also a lot more expensive. So that's just the way the world is.
Well, thank you, Thomas, for a good presentation and good answers.